Drones are used in several industries such as agriculture, mining and construction. While there are significant advantages to using this technology, there are now calls for users to follow the laws to ensure safe and legal operations. Well, let's look at drone regulations in South Africa with Senior Associate for Corporate and Commercial Law at Cliff Dicker Hofmeyr, Haafizah Khota. Haafizah, appreciate your time this evening. Can you provide an overview of the recent changes to drone regulations in South Africa?
Good evening, Hugo, and good evening to your viewers. Yes, so the regulatory framework for drones in South Africa is relatively new. The South African Civil Aviation Authority is mandated to regulate drones in South Africa, and the SACAA introduced a comprehensive set of drone regulations for remote piloted aircraft systems, as they call it, in 2015, making South Africa one of the first countries in Africa to formalize drone usage.
So what's necessitated these changes?
It's the increased uptake in usage of drones, both in the private and the commercial sector. We're seeing quite a bit of drones being used in the agricultural, mining, and surveillance spaces.
So, but what are the most significant changes that the drone users have to contend with now?
Well, the regulations distinguish primarily between private and commercial use. So private use refers to the operations of drones for recreational activities, whereas commercial use envisages operating drones for financial gain. So users should be cognizant of whether they're falling within the private or commercial space. For private users, so those are your hobbyists, while they don't necessarily need to hold any licenses per se as issued by the Civil Aviation Authority, they are required to adhere to specific parameters such as flight altitude restrictions, distances from other people, surrounding buildings, vehicles, animals, etc., and no-fly zones. Whereas commercial users, on the other hand, are required to hold a remote pilot's license, as well as a remote piloted aircraft systems operating certificate, in addition to several other authorizations from the Civil Aviation Authority.
So we know now that people potentially could find themselves in trouble if they break some of the laws. So let's talk about the penalties for non-compliance with some of these new drone regulations.
Yes, so penalties include, fines, as well as time in prison or even confiscation of the drones. So, for example, if a commercial drone user is found to be operating without the requisite licenses or authorizations issued by the Civil Aviation Authority, they could be facing a fine of up to 50,000 Rand or imprisonment for a period up to 10 years.
Do you get a sense that the penalties are commensurate with the crimes committed?
When you look at the safety concerns, I think that they are. It is important when operating drones to recognize that you are utilizing airspace, which is quite a heavily regulated aspect, as well as possible infringements on people's privacy and safety and security. So I do believe that they are commensurate with the activities involved.
Now, I'd imagine, Haafizah, that there's been some criticism that's been raised regarding the new licensing process, particularly from small operators and hobbyists.
Absolutely, and particularly small businesses. The criticism is primarily that the requirements are very similar to that of manned aircraft. So we, as industry, we see that there's calls for the regulations to be adapted slightly so that they are a little bit more bespoke to the industry, to the drone industry, rather than the manned aircraft industry.
Just how much consultation was carried out before these new laws were imposed or implemented?
There was an amount of consultation, but as industry is always advocating, ongoing consultation is important to ensure that the regulations develop in a manner that is, both aligned with what the industry requires, as well as what the safety and security concerns that the Civil Aviation Authority and the regulator would be interested in.
So when we do a global comparison, right, how do South Africa's drone regulations compare to those in other countries, both on the continent and further afield?
So on the continent, I would say that South Africa has one of the more advanced regulatory frameworks. We often see that on the African continent, there's blanket restrictions on the use of drones, whereas if we look at the West and some of the European countries, their regulatory systems are a little bit more nuanced. You'd find that they are less aligned with those of the manned aircraft industry and a little bit more relaxed for recreational or hobbyist users.
Do you have stats on the numbers of drone pilots that we have? Obviously, based on those that are licensed.
As far as I understand it, that there's a significant portion of unlicensed users. The SACAA would be the best to give those figures.
Okay, so when we look at future revisions or updates, can we expect what can we expect in the drone regulations to better align with the global practices and obviously technological advancements? Because technology is something that is upon us all the time.
We hope to see that the regulations ease up a little bit on smaller businesses to allow industry to flourish while still maintaining, the requisite safety controls.
Haafizah Khota, appreciate your time. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Corporate and commercial lawyer at Cliff Decker Hoffmeyer, giving us an update on drone regulations that have been recently instituted.